activity came from. Sorry, can I just jump to the next slide? Thank you, that's great. In terms of background then, here in Glasgow, as you would expect, it's a very traditional shipbuilding environment. And that has led to very traditional working arrangement, frankly very inflexible, very regulated, very controlled. And what that was leading to was that we had a history here in the business, frankly, of program delay. We had some affordability challenges against the programs we have coming up in the future. And ultimately, the feeling across the business was that we were uncompetitive or uncompetitive. Back in 2012, the Naval Ships Change Program was established. And part of that was a people element, a people work stream. And what we primarily were focused on was about how we could tap into a greater level of discretionary effort from the workforce. What we were seeing was that people were coming in, we were seeing tremendous amounts of discretion in what people described they did outside of work, but the moment they walked through the door, we weren't seeing that. We weren't getting that benefit that we needed to change the way that we were operating and ultimately to be more successful. And there was a number of legs to that transformation. It wasn't just about people, but for the purpose of this discussion today, I'll reflect on what we did in that people element of the change program. And what we introduced was something called smart working. If I can just jump to the next slide. So smart working essentially is about flexibility and is about agile working, but it was about more than that. It was about creating a culture of trust and empowerment. And the first thing we needed to do was we needed to break the kind of culture we had of one size fits all. And basically, as you would expect, we're a very heavily unionized environment here. And traditionally what we'd done was if we had to do something for the blue-collar workforce, we would have to do something for the white-collar and so on and vice versa. And that just wasn't practical when it came to this topic. The reality is that a welder does not do the same job as someone working in the finance department, does not do the same job as someone working in engineering. So what we needed to do is we needed to break that mentality and make it clear that everyone would benefit, but that the way that they benefited would feel different depending on the type of job that they did. And so what we did was we bucketed up into three different elements. The first was around the production population, and we introduced something called schedule-based working, and that will be a big focus of what I'm talking about in this presentation, because it is very different to anything that we have done before, and actually very different to what we've seen any other organization do in terms of how far we tried to go with it. For our professional population, that was a bit more of a standard flexible working offering, whereby you can accrue hours and take them back at your leisure. And then for our executive population, we introduced something called Exec Flex, which was basically complete flexibility, whereby there are no fixed hours, no fixed days. You work as many or as few hours as you feel as an individual you need to do your job. You are fully trusted to work in that way. We'd actually hoped to be able to roll that out across the professional population as well, but the feedback was that they actually liked having some rules around how they operate to let them feel a bit more in control. It felt like too much of a step. So, you know, that will tell you we've still got a bit of a journey to go on in terms of trust and so on. So if I just jump onto the next slide, I think something that we just really want to highlight, you know, we talk here, and I do appreciate the topic of this session, but for us it's very much around agile working rather than sort of flexible working, because flexible working for us is something that we need to offer, and that all businesses in some form or another will be offering some form of flexible working. Agile working is what we want to do, and the difference as we see it is that it's not just about what people need to do with regards to flexibility, it's what they want to do. Very often in organizations, when you think about flexibility, naturally it does tend to wander towards people who have commitments, be that family, be that carers, be that whatever it may be, but it's about people needing flexibility. And what we're saying is no, everybody will benefit and enjoy some form of flexibility, irrespective of what the reasons for that are. And for us, that was about time, location, and style. And it was about, again, recognizing that everybody has different preferences across those three areas and has different things to do. I say this every time I do the presentation, but that picture there is of my son. There isn't actually a huge amount of reason to have it in it, but it always makes me feel better doing a presentation knowing he's involved somewhere. The other thing around this was that for us, we didn't create a business case. And so often, particularly in a business as large as ours, things get very process-driven, and it's easy to almost get a bit bogged down in what does the business case tell us. We felt on this topic it was just the right thing to do. And it was something that the management committee at the time were very clear on. Let's just go and get this done because it's the right thing. And that, for me, felt very refreshing and was very positive in terms of our approach to this. If I just jump to the next slide in terms of the why. So although I'm saying we didn't have a business case, it was, it is important to understand what the benefits, what we were trying to achieve. And I'm very conscious that a lot of this is quite HR-y buzzwords, things that you would expect us to say. But actually, as I'll go through the presentation, you'll see that all of these things have actually been borne out in reality. And I'm not going to touch on them all here. I'll just call out a couple. I think team-based delivery was an important one for us. For too long, we'd inadvertently fallen into a scenario where people were working very much as individuals, and that team ethos had been lost, and we felt that that was something important to try and get back. I've also touched there on the culture of trust and empowerment, but again, we were a very process-driven, very rules-based organization, and it's very difficult for us to try and then deliver a rhetoric around we trust the people and we empower them in that environment. So that was a key one for us. But underpinning all of this, as I've said at the beginning, and it is a kind of key theme all the way through, is around increasing the level of discretionary effort that we saw from our employees. And then ultimately that enhances business performance. But the key thing for this was, and again, hopefully as I carry on, this will come out more clearly, is that it had to feel, and it has very much felt, as win-win. So employees are benefiting from a better employment proposition, a better way of working, a better culture, and ultimately the business is winning because that manifests itself then in enhanced performance, both at the individual level, the team level, and then ultimately at the business level. So if I go on to more specifically then what it was we did, I've described the three different kind of areas, but what we wanted to do was, although the mechanisms for each of our populations were different, we felt very strongly that we wanted to have a core set of underpinning principles that would be across, irrespective of what job you're in, these principles would hold true. And again, you can see them hopefully there on the screen, so I won't go through each one. And again, I'll just pull out a couple. The first one there that says any role can be done flexibly, that for us was a complete reversal perhaps on where we've been before. In the past, the emphasis would have been on, you have to prove to me why a role can be done in a flexible manner. Now, it's very, as I said, it's a complete reversal. It's like we assume that there can be some form of flexibility, be that time, location, etc., for any role. And I think as a mindset, that changes the whole conversation that the business has with its employees and that they have with their line leaders. And the other one I'd just like to pull out there is about it being a two-way street. So, there has to be trust here on both sides. And you will always have some people who, unfortunately, will maybe take advantage of the new rules and take advantage of the system. But you know what? That's okay. We will deal with those very small number of people as and when that occurs. For too long in our business and other businesses that I've spoken to about this, the rules are set up almost to reflect those one or two bad apples, and they're not set up for the 95, 98% of the population who just want to come in and do a good job and enjoy the place that they work. And again, that for us was a big mindset change and trying to give up that level of control and trust that people will enjoy and benefit from a different way of operating. So as I said, for the execs, it was very much complete flexibility. And probably our mistake is we just didn't brand it well enough. Richard Branson talks a lot about unlimited holidays for his people. Well, ultimately, that's what we did. It's just that we weren't perhaps smart enough to brand it that way. Professionals I described, and then ultimately that comes on to production. So the challenge of production clearly is different to that of the other areas that I've described, because in a shipbuilding environment, that is heavy manufacturing. And they have, in the past, not benefited from any form of flexibility or empowerment or trust anywhere near the level that we felt that we could offer. So we introduced something in that environment called schedule-based working. the schedule-based working essentially is based on a weekly target. So you set a weekly target that's about output, but it includes other things around standards, SHE, quality, all the things that are important to the organization. And the fundamental principle of this is that it's about output and not attendance. And if you take away only one line from my whole sort of presentation here, it would be that line. It's about output, not attendance. Not just in production, but the other areas I described earlier. All as a business, surely, that we care about is that when people come to work, that they feel encouraged, motivated, supported to deliver. It does not matter how many hours they sit in the office. It is about their output. So back to production, we have the weekly target. We consolidated all their pay into one monthly payment, so they get the same if they do 4 32-hour weeks or 4 45-hour weeks. The point is, it's up to that team to determine how many hours a week it does to deliver that target. And as soon as it's delivered, they go home. And if it's not delivered within their standard 4.5 days, we would ask them to work amongst themselves to work out how it was that they were going to deliver that target. But as you can imagine, given that level of control and trust, they have never once needed to work beyond the set time because they worked collectively to deliver that target. So if I can just jump on to the next slide. I'm not going to spend a lot of time describing what we did. I can do for anyone who's interested, but you know, it is quite specific to a manufacturing environment. So again, a bit like with some of the other slides, I'll just pull out a couple of the key points here. It has been a significant challenge to roll this out in such a complex manufacturing environment, and actually we're learning all the time. And the reality is, I don't think we will be able to roll this out completely across all of our production workforce, because as you get into bigger teams that are ultimately teams of several hundred, that the mechanics start to break down and it doesn't work. Where we found this does work is in more manageable teams where you can control the inputs and they support each other and they can more clearly identify with the team. But a couple of the bits here. So again, this is a production workforce who traditionally haven't had any kind of flexibility, any kind of control over their working environment. So the first thing we had to do was this idea of intellectualizing the mechanics. We actually had to think through how we were going to do this and what was important to the workforce. And then the big bit for us was in managing the emotion of the workforce. I can't emphasize enough how, and I know it's a cliche, and anyone involved with change will know this is true about, you know, people going on that change journey. But as I said at the beginning, in a very heavily manufacturing, traditional, unionized environment, saying that we're going to go to, frankly, such a radical way of operating, there was a lot of reaction to that. So even though you're saying to people, you're potentially going to earn yourself more time off, and we've consolidated your overtime and pay, so you're going to get more money, still there was a natural reaction to that that said, oh, there's a catch here. What's the catch? And us getting over that trust issue of, we promise you there is no catch. We just think this is best for the workforce and best for the business was a difficult challenge. Luckily, the trade unions have been fully supportive of this since the beginning. And for anyone thinking about doing anything like this in a unionized environment, getting them on board right from the start might sound obvious, but you know, having them in the room helping you think through how it's going to work, rather than you going to them at the end and saying, here's what I propose we do, made a huge difference. The other thing that we did that was very different was around development of the team. Traditionally in our business, you know, in the I don't like the phrase, but in the office-based roles, people tend to find they get more development, particularly around capability, behavioral capability, leadership, and so on. Our production population have maybe suffered a bit in that the training they get tends to be very technical. So what we did was we took the teams, and we continued to do so, we took them off-site, we took them to a football ground, we had a facilitated day where a former manager of the club, you know, came and did a day, and it was all about winning as a team, losing as a team, working as a team. And actually the content was quite light, but what it was showing them the level of investment that the company was willing to put into this to show that we were really behind what it was we were trying to do. So that was a kind of, as I said, there's quite a few things on that screen, and if anyone is interested in the specific mechanics, I can pick up with you, I guess, offline on that rather than for the entire audience. This slide, just very quickly, and again, apologies, it's probably a bit of a cliched slide, but you know, ultimately what we were trying to achieve was, you know, we were trying to hit the weekly target, and we were trying to hit the earned value for the organization that we needed to maintain performance, and we wanted employees to benefit from the time off. And that's the processy part, that's the mechanics. But underneath all that, and this is the kind of point of this whole presentation for me, is that it's the culture that makes that possible. So we could spend a whole lot of time focusing on the systems and making it all work. But if the culture of having leaders leading, and I'll come on to this a bit more, but leaders leading in the right way, the trust, the empowerment, and so on, it would fail. So for us, it was getting the cultural change that led to all the benefits I'll describe in a moment. That was absolutely the focus. The culture wasn't an unintended consequence. The culture was the thing we targeted, and the rest of it came with it. If I can just jump to the next slide. So what I thought I'd do is to bring to life a bit more about what the culture felt like before and now. I've kind of done it in a day in the life of, and obviously some of this is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but all of the examples I'll give are real anecdotes or examples that we have seen by introducing this way of operating. So if we look here at the April 2013, frankly, the facilities that we had were pretty poor that the guys and girls operated in. There wasn't a lot of investment had gone in. It was, they'd been here for many, many years. We had a very strict clocking system where you clock in the morning, you clock out. The supervisors didn't spend enough time. That has been a general problem. Our supervisors were supervising. They were chasing people out of toilets. They were waiting for people to come back off lunch. All the kind of old school behaviour that you just can't believe exists in this day and age. That fortunately, we've now moved away from. Pay was very complicated for people. It was all based on, the only time you could earn more money was working more hours, and so on and so forth. And it just, none of this was conducive to any kind of work-life balance, any kind of employer of choice philosophy, any kind of D&I agenda. It was old school, bell-to-bell working, where, frankly, the operators weren't anywhere near as interested in driving performance or the output as they needed to be. So that's the kind of background which we had, or the context of before we introduced schedule-based working. So if I jump onto the next slide as kind of what life has been like in the places where we've rolled schedule-based working out. And that has been across circa 400 of our production operators. So it is a fairly sizable chunk of the workforce. And I should say that is just production. All of the remainder of the workforce have had the other types of flexibility I mentioned earlier on. So if I look at where we are now, so we've moved away from that idea of start and stop times. People start work as and when they arrive or when they want to start. And actually, we have people who, just because of the nature of how they arrive, do get here early. And now they'll get started off their own accord, get things set up for the rest of the team to come in and hit the ground running, because ultimately, they're all going to benefit if that target gets hit by the end of the week. The key focus for this from a business perspective was it has really changed the dialogue in terms of the operators being much more demanding from the business about getting everything that they need to do their job. In the past, frankly, if something wasn't where it needed to be, whether that planning, a plan, a drawing, the material, to be honest, people were just a bit, well, okay, it'll turn up when it does, we'll do the job. Now there's a real pull and a demand. And what that is doing is shining a light into other parts of the organization where perhaps we've had sticking plasters or fairly unproductive practices for a long time. And that's coming because that team want to work together, deliver it, so that they get away early, they get the Friday off, or they get away on even a Thursday afternoon if they really have a great week. And the other thing that's done, and there I've just had a brainwave, is the ideas generation coming out of the operators. Because, again, it's in their interest to find ways of doing things more effectively, more quickly, and so on. Ideas that we had actually put to them over the years and had been dismissed as that'll never work, now they're claiming as their own, and finding ways to get around problems that we've maybe had for 20 years and we've never been able to solve. Now, because these people are the experts, they live it and breathe it every day, the ideas that are coming has been phenomenal. And the one thing I would say is that we have to make sure we're seen to be responding to that as and when the questions and the ideas come, because the one thing we've got, that level of discretionary effort and buy-in that we're seeing is phenomenal, and we don't want to be doing anything to discourage it or to switch that off. The other thing in this environment is giving people control over the hours that they work. The role of the leader fundamentally changes. There's no need now to be chasing people around and back to work. That's happening. So the role of the leader becomes that of a coach. And how can I help? What do you need? And we learned lessons all the way through this, one of which was that we probably, again, it's old habits die hard. We didn't put too many rules around this in terms of, okay, you all start as a team, you all finish as a team. And within a couple of weeks, the operator came to say, you know what, we will deal with this. Leave this to us. We'll decide if anyone needs to stay late or not. We know who's got to do what our personal lives are involved and so on. Trust us, we'll do it. And you know what? We've never looked back. Management has never needed to get involved. The team determines if 5 people are needed to finish a job, they'll determine which 5 it is, and the next week it'll be a different 5. And again, that level of ownership of this to benefit from the flexibility that they've been given has just been phenomenal. It's also led to them challenging each other. So rather than just traditionally relying on maybe leadership and management to intervene when someone's not pulling their weight, they're challenging each other to say, come on, we've got to get this done. And what can I do to help you? What do you need from me? You know, and in the past, maybe people would finish their own piece of work, and now it's very much about the team, giving the team that target and incentivizing them to the flexibility they have to deliver it. And ultimately, if they finish early, as I've said a few times, that's time off. And in our pipe shop where we first rolled this out, they've barely worked Friday in 2-3 years because they have so mastered the art of getting this done. So that's for their benefit, but they've hit the target the business has set for them. And another thing, more just an anecdote than anything, but to give you an example of the culture change that underpins this, our apprentices, we couldn't give them the time off because there's very fixed rules around how many hours a week they can and can't work. So we needed them in on the Friday. So what people in the team were doing and still are doing is volunteering on their day off to come in and coach the apprentices in one-to-one training. Even though they'd earned that right to be off, they were coming in to work with the apprentices because they kind of felt that give that bit back. You know, and frankly, 2, 3, 4 years ago, before we rolled this out, we just were not seeing that kind of discretionary effort, that giving from the workforce. So, you know, just one anecdote, but a strong one in terms of how this has kind of changed the culture and ultimately benefited the business. I jump onto business benefits because it's important that we do capture what it is that. Let's jump to the next slide. Sorry, yeah, thanks. Sorry, because it's important that, you know, there is a tangible benefit here, because then it encourages us to keep going and hopefully encourages other businesses to have a think about how important changing the culture can be. So in terms of business performance, you can see that I won't go through them. The one I would just call out there is absence. So we've seen across all of our populations, not just, it says manufacturing there, but actually professional and exec. Clearly with professional exec, by giving people just greater control over the hours they do and don't work and removing core hours and so on, people then tend to manage their time in a different way. And that has affected the absence. In manufacturing, it's been much more stark because, simply put, the operators do not want to let their team members down. The way it works is we don't take time off the target for short-term absence. We do take it off for long-term sick, obviously. But they frankly don't mind letting the business down, but they don't want to let their teammates down. They don't want to look them in the eye and be like, why were you off yesterday? So it's had a really positive impact in terms of that. From a customer perception, we were actually awarded some funding through the UK Commission for Employment and Skills for this because it felt different. It felt like trying to introduce flexibility into parts of a business and a sector that we have just never been able to do before. So that was good, and that was a real sort of stamp for us in terms of saying, you know what, this isn't just us that think this is the right thing to do. We got a bit of external recognition from that. And ultimately, when it comes to productivity, the teams in production have delivered minimum 17% more output every week than they did before schedule-based working, and yet they've done that and still, in the vast majority of cases, earned their Friday off. So they're delivering nearly 20% more, but in a shorter working week, all because we've given them that incentive around controlling and empowering them around the hours and the times that they choose to work. The other bit there around business process fundamentally improved is that point of shining a light. Everyone now is got a vested interest in making the business work better, and clearly that's to all of our advantage. And ultimately, all of these things that I've talked about lead to improved cost performance, which, if I go back to where we started with the customer, it ultimately is where we needed to get to. So if I just jump on to the last slide then, a bit of a summary. I can't emphasize enough how, for us, this was never about rules, and it was never about the policies and the procedures. It was about how we change a culture of trust and empowerment, and making people feel like they have ownership of how they work, when they work, where they work, and the style to an extent in which they work, though I haven't really touched on that in this. And that has led to ultimately a step change in output, productivity, bottom line performance, and has allowed us then to kind of take this learning and go and share it. We shared it with the customer, we shared it across various sectors. We've had a number of organizations that have come up to the Clyde to see what it is that we've done and to talk to us about it and to take some learning from it. So all in all, it has been and it's still ongoing. We're not done yet, and we do have some challenges. I'm not going to pretend that we don't. But ultimately, if I look where we came to, where we've come from 3 or 4 years ago, it has been a tremendous success story, and one that we're going to keep persevering to try and mature over the next 3 or 4 years. So that was really it from me. And obviously, if anyone does have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Thanks, Chris. That was fascinating. Some really interesting facts and initiatives there. We've got quite a few questions actually, some of which you kind of answered bits of it after the questions came in. But I'll just go through them, and maybe there's a slightly different angle we can take to some of the responses. So one question here is, you mentioned right at the outset about getting kind of leadership buy-in, and you didn't have to do a lot of kind of business planning and look at all the processes, etc. There was sort of almost immediate buy-in. You're a large organisation, so how did you make that happen? How did that come about? Presumably other changes within the organisation have to go through specific processes. So how did you manage to convince people that this was something that you could and should just do?
So the simple answer. Oh, there's a bit of echo there. All right. So the answer was that we because I'd said about us being a traditional organization, we were behind the curve, and we looked at what other businesses were doing, particularly around the execs and the professionals, we were playing catch up. And when you make the case to someone about, particularly if you look at the leaders in the business, about do we trust our leaders, yes or no? If the response of the management committee is we don't trust our leaders to manage their own time properly, then you really do have a fundamental issue there. So when we made that point, the response was, well, yes, we trust these people with millions of pound budgets and all sorts of decisions and managing thousands of people. So yes, we trust them to manage their own time. And so the nature of the conversation was more like that. And the fact, as I said, if I'm being completely honest, there was other businesses well ahead of us in terms of the level of flexibility they offered. For production, that was slightly different because it felt very different. So that was a, let's go and try it in an area of 50 people where we think it will be a success, take stock, and then see. And I think the expectation was that if it had been a success, we would go and do a business case. But the reality was that the pilot of the 50 people was such a success in terms of output, in terms of the culture change, that then the sort of dialogue flipped, and it was like, how quickly can we roll this out everywhere else? The need for then a business case or a risk review or all that just dissipated. So for the production area, it was that we got permission to go and give it a try in a safe environment, and then success just led to it growing arms and legs.
Okay, great. Let's ask some of these other questions. So, question here, does Chris have some financial numbers that back up the benefits to BAE? I know you talked about the reduction in absence, you've got stats for that, and the increase, 17% increase in productivity. What about some financial numbers?
I do have. I am quite conscious, however, that this call is recorded and will be kind of available, so I can't really talk finances because it involves numbers that would go into commercial negotiation around contracts. The numbers I would highlight really is the percentages of the productivity improvement. You know, we started off with 15%, so that's the way it works is we have a set of norms for every job. So if I just talk about building a pipe for a split second, you know, if you've got a pipe the size of a pen and a pipe the size of a kitchen table. We had the same norm for both, which is clearly nonsensical. So we had to work out the norms for everything we do in this business. And that in itself was a useful thing. But then what we did was we just took percentage off every job we do. 15, then that increased to 17, and that increased to 20. So it was 20% reduction in the time it takes to do any job became the new norm. So that's probably the figure I'm most comfortable using. What I would say about benefit is that there is a risk that businesses can get a bit greedy. You can keep going, well, if we can get 17, let's go for 20, let's go for 25. And in the spirit of changing a culture, you've got to be careful that you maintain fairness and transparency with the workforce. So you know what? 17% is the norm we kind of stuck at. In a couple of areas, we've gone a bit beyond it. But let's just recognize how good that is and not keep trying to squeeze more and more to the point where you then break that level of trust and then the whole thing comes crashing down.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, that ties in with a question that we had here, which was around, do the output targets change when teams become efficient? So you mentioned about many teams only ending up having to work Monday to Thursday because they were so efficient in terms of meeting their output targets. If that's a regular occurrence, does that then mean that the output targets are changed to accommodate their efficiency? I guess that's what you're talking about there.
So a bit like what I just said, they do. It's all just a very fine line. There's no black and white kind of. Again, we're trying to avoid real black and white rules. If a team routinely was finishing the target by kind of Wednesday lunchtime, then I think both sides, workforce and leadership, would expect to have a bit of a conversation about. I think there's probably a bit more to be done in terms of the target. But for us, it is very much around the workforce has to feel like it's winning from this too. If we keep upping that target so that they never end up getting the Friday off, then we're going to lose all of that momentum and discretionary effort and drive that they're working to, over the years. Now, one of the things we did say about increasing the target was that if over the years the team are consistently identifying better and better ways of doing things, then they would also expect that it's fair that we would incrementally increase that target. But the rule is it's always done in full discussion with them about why we think that's achievable. And there's been times where we've increased it, and there's been times where we've actually reduced it. And it's all been done through a really frank dialogue. And just as another anecdote, there's been times where the team has come to us, the workforce come to us and said, you've been too generous with that, we could do that faster. So again, another example of where that cultural change is manifesting itself.
Okay, this sort of slightly links to it, but it may be something that you've experienced. So we have a question here which says, do you get clashes between individuals, or do you get clashes between individuals as a result of the working change that means teams have had to be reassigned?
No, we haven't really seen any clashes. We've certainly in the production environment, we've not seen anything like that we thought we might. It has worked well. People have supported each other ultimately, across teams and within teams. There has been the odd occasion where someone has had to transfer out of an area where we have it, and that's been a difficult conversation. But we've put mechanisms in place so that people are given plenty of notice and the payments carry on a bit longer and all that kind of stuff. One of the things in our professional and exec populations, there was some concern there that, with this idea of people working at home at different hours, how would that work as well? Because they're less tightly bound as a team and yet still need each other. So the way that we did that was, rather than just rolling out new flexible working arrangements, we did something called facilitated conversations, where line leaders would sit with their teams and they would just have a chat, literally a chat around, what does this mean for us? What are people's thoughts? What's your preferences? And just kind of get some of the concerns and the worry beads out onto the table. And very quickly people realized, you know what, there is no downsides here. We are all winning out of this. We've got far more flexibility that suits ourselves. And as long as we're sensible and keep talking to each other about who needs to be in, when and where, and are trusted to be at the right meetings at the right time. And 99.9% of people have never abused that trust. But by doing that approach and just calling out some of the worries up front, it significantly reduced any issues further down the line.
Thanks, Chris. I think we've got a final question here, which is, How do you ensure that people are available on site when needed in terms of health and safety, for example, on construction sites? I think you might have touched on that, but if you could just re-explain it, that'd be great.
So we have supporting teams. So the workforce have the opportunity to determine their own working hours. And although we don't have fixed rules, there are certain parameters that they operate within. So you wouldn't have an individual turning up and doing lone working at height in the middle of the night on their own. And that's common sense stuff that there's never been any issue with. There's a kind of recognized, there's a real focus on SHE in our business, and that's kind of recognized. We do have supporting teams that sit around these teams from a SHE perspective. And what we've done for them is we've come up with different arrangements. So if they're needed to be in on a time where they've maybe earned the time off, then it's things like we just give them it back in lieu. So again, it's back to my point right back at the beginning, which is the arrangements will be tweaked so that they might be slightly different, even for people in theory in the same team, but that everyone will benefit and no one will ultimately lose out.
Okay, well that's all the questions that I've got here. So if we just give people 1 more minute if they'd like to submit any further questions, then and then we'll move over to Jenny. So just wait 1 more minute, see if there's any more questions. No, but as you've mentioned, Chris, if you're happy, we'll share your contact details when we share the slides, and people can go back to you directly if they've got any specific questions. So we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Chris. And Jenny Henderson's now going to speak to us about how to make job sharing work for you. Jenny works for DSTL as Transformation Director. So over to you now then, Jenny.
Hi everybody, it's great to be able to talk to you this afternoon. We can go straight on to the next slide if you wouldn't mind, Ruth. So I thought I'd just start by introducing myself, and as you can obviously see from the picture, I am one half of a job share. My colleague Alex Lambert and I fulfil the DSTL Transformation Director role, which means we're responsible for leading all of DSTL, which is the science and technology part of MOD's change programmes. And I'm going to briefly talk to you today about how we make our job share work, but I thought I'd probably start by telling you how we came to be in a job share in the first place, because I think they are still quite an unusual thing. And it came from a piece of work that Alex and I were doing where I was in a previous role in DSTL, and it was very obvious a reorganisation was needed, and Alex had the job of doing the reorganisation, and one of the things he did was reorganised me out of my job by deciding, with my agreement I hasten to add, that the role I was fulfilling wasn't needed anymore and could be delivered in a different way. Now, because he'd been running the programme and I was in a role that was effectively not going to be there anymore, we were both in a position where we were going to have to find a new job. So we were catching up and having a cup of coffee, and he said to me, have you seen that they're advertising for the Transformation Director role for DSTL, and are you going to apply? I said, well, I'm probably going to apply. Are you going to apply? We've had a very sort of honest relationship. We've worked together for a number of years. And he said, well, probably. And we looked at each other and we said, why are we a little bit reluctant? What is it? And I said, well, my problem is I'd really quite like to go part-time. I was in a full-time job, very, very busy. I've got other interests, and other things outside of work were starting to take up more and more time, to the point where I thought the answer is really going to be part-time. And Alex and his wife were going through the process of looking to adopt. So he also said, I don't really want a sort of full-time, fully, full-on job. So we looked at each other and you sort of could see the light bulb come on, and we said, why don't we apply as a job share? So we phoned up the recruiting line manager, who's the chief executive of DSTL, and we said, we'd like to apply for this job, but we'd like to apply as a job share. And there was probably the longest pause in the world where we were wondering whether he'd hung up the phone on us. And he went, yeah, I don't know how that's going to work. I don't know how we would do the process of applying as a job share, but we'll figure it out and we'd welcome the application. So we went through a competitive process and we got the job, which was great. And part of obviously what we had to do at the interview process was convince people that this would work as a job share. And a lot of what I'm about to talk to you about is really the explanation about how we thought through making the job share work. So if we can move on to the next slide, Ruth. I'm going to start with the absolute basics, and this is actually the bit that quite often when you say to people, oh, I'm in a job share, this is the first thing they ask about. They say, well, how does that work? How do I email you? How do I phone you? How do I know who's working on what day? So we, contrary to what you see in the picture, we do actually have our own IT. We're not literally handing a laptop between us on our handover day. But basically, Alex does the job Monday to Wednesday. I do the job Wednesday to Friday. But both of us are in a position where if we need to be a bit flexible around that, we can. We can cover each other's days if we need to. We have a shared IT account, so people can email us on a shared account and they don't need to think, oh, who's working which day? Are we going to be able to get hold of them? They just email the Transformation Director account. And we're always very clear in our diary about where we are. We have a shared calendar, so people can kind of see who's covering what, who's going to be at which meetings. And we have, in fact, on the previous slide, we have a joint photo. So when we need to make announcements about things, you got the smiley photo. We also have a glum photo for when we need to make more serious announcements. So the basics actually were pretty easy. There was a little bit of interesting discussion with our IT folks about really making the shared calendar and shared email work and having us both have access and storage of all the files. But that was actually the easy bit. And the next question we get, if we can go on to the next slide, is, well, okay, the IT sounds fine, but actually, how are you going to do the job? And we sat down quite carefully at the beginning, and we sat down with a job description, and we really thought about what was it that the job was there to do and what was the most sensible way of looking at delivering the responsibilities between us. Some of the responsibilities, it made sense for one person or the other to lead on. And some of the responsibilities we said, no, actually, we're going to share. We've got line management responsibilities. So we've carved the team in half, and nominally half the team report to Alex, half the team report to me. But in practice, everybody reports to both of us. It's just one of us gets the job of doing the formal write-up at the end of the year and that sort of thing. Our line manager manages us as a pair, so we have a shared set of objectives and we're assessed as a pair. So there's no need for our line manager to have to work out who's made which contribution to what things. We're assessed collectively on how we have delivered the job. And that's really important for us holding each other to account. Our line manager doesn't need to hold us to account separately. We hold each other to account for what we're needing to do. A little bit like actually in Chris's talk about how it's worked at BAE Systems. We're a little mini team and we're holding each other to account for making sure that we as a team are delivering. One of the things we did when we first sat, or if we can just go back a slide, Ruth, one of the things we did when we first sat down together was we had a really honest conversation about our values, what was important to us, what did we think about how we wanted to behave in the workplace, because we're extremely conscious that we are a representative of each other and our respective reputations are influenced by how the other half of us is behaving. And one of the things we did 3 months in that really, really helped us kind of make sure we were working harmoniously, really together really well, was we went and had what we called couples therapy. We have a coach and we went and had a joint session with our coach. It was slightly what I imagine marriage guidance counselling is like. And the first question our coach asked us was, give me 3 things that irritate you about each other. This was about 3 months after working together. And that facilitated a very honest conversation where we were able to bring out some little things that the other person was doing that were actually making it just a little bit harder for us to work effectively together. And we were able to discuss how we were going to resolve them and move forward. And it worked so well, in fact, that every 3 months we repeat that session and just really make sure that actually our working relationship is rubbing along really smoothly and that we are, I guess it's the sort of whole is greater than the sum of the parts. As a team, we're working better together than we would be individually. If we could move on to the next slide. So that's a little bit about the basics, and it's a little bit about how we sort of set ourselves up to work together. The obvious next question that comes up is colleagues kind of being a bit concerned about, well, how's it going to work? How am I going to know who I'm working with? And one of the things we've set out to be right from the very beginning is incredibly consistent. Our colleagues were very worried at the beginning that because we were two people, if there was a big decision to be made, they would have to brief one of us, brief the other one. What if we had a difference of opinion? And we said, no, there's none of that. We are a pair. If you want to brief us about something, brief one of us. It's then the responsibility of that person to tell the other person what's going on, and we'll come to a collective view about our response from the role we represent in the organisation about what we think on that issue. So we don't need to be treated as two separate stakeholders. We can be treated as one stakeholder, and it shouldn't require anybody who needs to work or interact with us to do any more effort than they would if we were a single person. This, of course, means for us there's an awful lot of communication between us. We make sure that we're constantly handing over what our current state of play is on things we've been interacting with colleagues on. And that's really, really important. I think we might be setting the world record for the very longest text messages ever sent, because quite often on a day when one of us has done something and another person's not working, we'll send them a long text message saying, I've just spoken to person X about this, I've told them this, I've said that when you're back in the office you'll pick the conversation up, but you're fully up to speed on what's been going on. I guess the other kind of critical stakeholders we really thought about how we were going to work with was our line manager. And again, it was the first time our line manager had worked with a job share or managed a job share. So we've been through quite a learning process together to really help him understand how to manage us and to really help him feel that it isn't any more effort than managing a single person. And he's finally got to the point, I think, where he's really comfortable with that. And a good example of that was Alex is currently on his paternity leave, having successfully been through his adoption process. And for our end of year review, our line manager said, oh, Alex is out. Is it all right if I just sit down and go through it with you, Jenny? I know you'll hand it all over to Alex. He didn't feel that we both needed to be there to hear that feedback, and I've duly done that. I think the other set of stakeholders we've worked quite hard to make sure they know how to work with us is our team. So whilst from a line management perspective we've divided the team in half just so that we kind of have equal amounts of work in terms of writing the team up at the end of the year, we actually have worked quite hard to make sure our team feel they can catch either of us, we'll both be up to speed, and that we're interchangeable in terms of being able to give opinions on the work of the team and so on and so forth. And that's really, really important, because I think there's sometimes a misunderstanding with job shares that it's like two part-time people, and actually, yes, we both are, but actually our overlap needs to be such that we are completely interchangeable. So if a meeting that Alex would normally chair falls on a day that I'm working and he's not, I need to be able to step in seamlessly and chair that meeting. If a question comes up about one of the pieces of work that I've tended to focus on more, Alex needs to be able to cover that question as if it was me, because we don't want to be in a situation where people are having to sort of wait to catch one half of us to ask us about something. I think the other thing to say about working with others that we've had to work quite hard with some colleagues is to remind them that whilst we're two people, we add up to one person's worth of effort in terms of, you know, how much work we can put into the business. We had a situation where a colleague was setting up health and safety inspections for members of the executive to do, and we got kind of double rations, and we had to go back and say, no, hang on a minute, you've missed the point. We've only got one person's worth of effort. We need to have between us the same amount of inspections to do as any of our other full-time colleagues. And that's just taken a little bit of an education process. And it's probably not surprising that I think, you know, people aren't used to working with a job share, and they're not necessarily going to sort of automatically think about that. If I could move on to the next slide, Ruth. So everything I've talked about so far is really about the kind of making the job share work. And actually a lot of it's come from the premise that people are naturally quite sceptical and almost feel that working with a job share is going to be harder than working with a single person fulfilling the role. And we've gone out of our way to try and make it as seamless and smooth as possible. But one of the things we're really strong advocates for is that actually we feel that if you deliver as a job share, you can actually potentially achieve and deliver more than if you were one person fulfilling that role. And that comes down to two things. It comes down firstly to the fact that you have naturally got complementary skills. And whereas if you were an individual person, you'd have your strengths and you'd have your areas for development. When you combine the two of us, we actually have a greater set of strengths, and in often, the areas I'm less good at, Alex is better at. So between us, we managed to make a whole, fully effective person able to deliver. And that's been a really pleasant surprise. The other thing that's been a really fantastic opportunity of working in a job share is we are each other's kind of second brain. So when sometimes if you've got a really tricky problem, you'd go to a colleague and you'd say, oh, what do you think about this? Can you give me some advice? We can do that with each other, which makes it an incredibly safe environment. It means that collectively we have thought through the different avenues of how other people might think about things we're going to decide, and we've come up with the best possible solution, because it's not just one brain thinking about the problem. And we dealt with some very tough problems in our role, actually, and I think that kind of two brains on the problem has really, really paid dividend. I think in the round, though, it's also important just to remember that you're basically measured, as you would be in any job, on what you deliver and how effectively you deliver it. So all the sort of hygiene stuff about making the job share work needs to just be seamless, so that what you're actually able to do is get on and deliver, and that people feel that you're a valuable addition to the overall team, that you're contributing effectively in your role. And I think we've been very lucky that at no point in delivering the job share has anybody even hinted that they would be finding it easier if they were just having one person fulfilling that role. And in fact, people like our line manager have positively said, I really can see the benefit of having two brains on some of these problems. So that's a really key thing for us, and a sort of pleasant surprise, I think, for a number of the people who've worked with us. And if I can move on to my next slide. Something that didn't really occur to us when we started the job, but has started to really come into sharp relief in the last few months, is you've got to think about what are you going to do after the job. It's quite a tradition in the civil service that you don't tend to do jobs for years and years and years. There's a sort of expectation that you'll do a job for 2-3 years and then you'll move on. It's particularly true for us because the job we took, the transformation director job, was a time-bounded job. So we did know that when 3 years was up, which is the end of this year that we're in now, we'd be having to move on. And one of the discussions we've started to have is really, where do we see ourselves going next? And the reason that's important in a job share is, whereas if you were an individual in a job and you'd be thinking about your career development, you'd be thinking about how you capitalise on the opportunities that the job you're in gives you to develop new skills, to make new networks, to actually kind of put you in a position where you're going to be a credible applicant for a future job. We need to make sure that we're being really honest with each other about our aspirations, so we don't end up feeling potentially resentful that one of us has happened to do the tasks that have given them the development and put them in a good position for their next role, and the other person finds they've been left doing the necessary but perhaps less exciting activities. So we've had a really honest conversation fairly recently, actually, about where do we see ourselves going after this job. We may move on as a pair, we haven't ruled that out, but we may choose to take our careers in slightly different directions. And we've worked really hard to make sure that in the coming year, the way we manage and divide our responsibilities actually makes each of us get what we need to get out of the job to address any areas that we've had as feedback about where we might be going next. And it's probably worth saying, I guess, at this point, that we constantly within the role are looking at kind of, have we got the balance of responsibilities right? Are we kind of spreading the load evenly? We have a very regular sort of weekly catch up where we look at just how loaded we are, and we have veered and hauled things and said, actually, look, I'll put this thing I was focusing on the back burner for a couple of weeks so I can put a bit of extra manpower into what you're doing. And that's another key benefit of the job share, actually, that it allows you to kind of keep your energy levels up and to sort of surge and do additional activities. And if I can move on to my final summary slide. So I've really covered, in fairly short order, the sort of basic elements of getting a job share in place. The first three, really getting the kind of basics about how people are going to communicate with you, get hold of you, reach you, got those in place. How are you going to work together, making sure you're absolutely clear on the division of responsibilities, thinking about how you're going to work with others. All of that is the sort of hygiene stuff that you need to have in place so that you can actually get on and realise what we believe is a real benefit of working in a job share, which is delivering the job that you're there to do to the absolute best of your ability, and to make sure that you've got the opportunity to develop and you're really honest about where you might be going next. And I really feel we were a bit of an experiment. We were a bit of a sort of trailblazer for this. There weren't other job shares really around in our organisation when we started this. And I think it's very encouraging, actually, that as a result of us doing this and showing it really can be done and done successfully, quite a number of other job shares have sprung up as a sort of way of people who, for a whole variety of reasons, feeling part-time work is the way they want to go, actually being able to step in and collaborate with someone to deliver a full-time job. So I think I'd really want to encourage anyone who's thinking about it, absolutely you can make a job share work, and you can get your line manager and your colleagues in a great space where they can see it's a really positive thing rather than something they need to put up with. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Ali. Sorry, thanks, Jenny. I'm reading the questions, obviously. We have got a number of questions here, and I'll just pick out those that actually we've probably got time to go through all of them. But question here. You've mentioned a lot about, obviously, the benefits to you and Alex in terms of working as a team and sharing this job. Do you think your employer feels the benefits of the job share outweigh the additional costs, i.e. the overlap days, so they're paying for 6 days rather than 5?
I would, yeah, I mean, definitely in the, I think there's two things. Because we can both work very hard for the days we work, I think the sort of productivity we give is much higher. I mean, you know, full-time colleagues would definitely say by the time you get to the end of the week, you're kind of starting to feel a bit more drained. So our kind of energy and productivity is high. I think there's also a kind of retention question. I think I was certainly very keen to move to part-time, and if it hadn't been an opportunity with my current employer, I would have thought about moving somewhere else. And obviously I've got a lot of history with the organisation, and I was someone they wanted to retain. And I think also we both put in quite a bit of discretionary effort because we're motivated to do the job really well. So I think our employer most definitely gets the value out of us to be worth, yeah, the kind of 1.2 people they're paying for.
Thank you. Another question here. Are your work-free days completely work-free? Or are you engaging with your job share on your days when you're not working as well? I think you mentioned something about doing text messages on days you don't work, so that's prompted that question.
Well, and so both of us are pretty strict. On the days we don't work, we don't log in, because apart from anything else, it's quite annoying if it's my day and I can suddenly see Alex has logged in and is interfering, as I would see it in things. So there's a really strict kind of, no, when we're not in work, we're not in work. We would correspond with each other if we felt it was something that was a sort of short, snappy, just to make you aware. We would only phone each other by mutual agreement, because we do respect the fact that on a non-working day you're going to be off doing something else. So occasionally Alex would text me and say, if you're available today, could we have a quick chat, literally 10 minutes? And I have no compunction about texting him back and saying, I really can't talk today, I'm in the middle of something else, could we talk first thing tomorrow? But that, you know, I would say I very rarely need to work on my non-working day, and when I do work, it's literally a few minutes just to keep on top of things, and that's well worth it for, you know, not coming in and having an unpleasant surprise on your work. You know, the first working day you're back in the week, you want to be forewarned if there's anything that you need to be aware of as you walk in the door.
Indeed. Another question here. Do you think personality is critical to success, i.e. liking each other? I mean, you talked about the two of you going to the organisation as a job share package. How does it work potentially if there's a job share opportunity? It's not two people that come together, it's the organisation putting two people together.
It's really interesting, actually, because I would have said when we first started it was quite important to sort of have some pre-knowledge of your job share partner and, you know you were going to get along well with them. But actually I'm going through an interesting experience at the moment because Alex is on his paternity leave and he's taking an extended period of paternity leave. So we've solved the problem of how does his half of the job share get done by appointing someone from the team to step up and fulfill Alex's half of the role for the period that Alex is on paternity leave. And that's someone who I wouldn't have said I knew particularly well before I'm now job sharing with them. And actually, because of having had the experience of sort of setting up the job share with Alex, I've been able to very rapidly work with this other individual and go, right, this is how we've made it work. This is what's important. And it's working absolutely fine. So Alex, yeah, I said to Alex on the phone when I phoned him last night, he'd been replaced and we were coping fine without him. But I think the most important thing is you share values and you share the right kind of attitude to what's important in work, because then actually you're going to make sure you get the job done in a way that you both are happy with. I think the biggest problem would be if you were job sharing with someone who had very different values to you and, you know, different standards of behaviour. I think it probably helps if you like your job share partner because you're going to spend a reasonable amount of time in correspondence with them, although ironically very little time with them in work.
Indeed. And you've probably answered another question here, which was about what happens if one of you leaves. So basically you're saying that Alex isn't irreplaceable, that the other half of you can indeed be replaced and somebody can step up to half a job share if that happens, that one of you moves on.
Yeah, and actually I think it's going to become an increasingly interesting challenge that's going to have to be fulfilled, because as more and more job shares start up, the likelihood is that one half of the job share will be ready to move on and go and do something else before the other one is. So I think that I can sort of see people, you know, stepping up and fulfilling the role. And one of the conversations we've had with our coach is how if that happens, you don't end up in a situation where the person who was the established job share partner sort of ends up in a kind of senior partner role. It has to be a partnership of equals. So if someone new comes into the job share, they need to be supported in actually working as an equal rather than feeling like they're the sort of junior partner joining something that was already established.
Yep, that all makes sense. Somebody says here they work part-time. It's not quite a job share, and sometimes they struggle with people forgetting to keep them updated. I know you mentioned a number of things, but a request here for any tips and tools for speaking to this. So how do you get people to share information?
So I think it is tricky. I mean, I can relate to working part-time on my own. I mean, I did it slightly more than 10 years ago as a part-time person, and I definitely see the contrast in a job share, because I think the difference in a job share is it's fundamentally the responsibility of one person, your job share partner, to keep you updated because they've been there in the half of the week that you haven't. I think it is harder as a part-time person, but the sort of discipline of people thinking about doing quick handover notes, just brief text to say this is what's been going on, having a sort of shared repository where data is put of things. I mean, Alex and I, for example, have an email folder of sort of things you need to read when you get back in the office, just so that very rapidly we can come back up to speed on stuff that's been happening. I think all of those things could be put in place for someone who's part-time. It's just a question of educating the colleagues, a wider set of colleagues, about how to keep you updated. But definitely I think, yeah, short and sharp, quick updates is probably the way to go, rather than someone feeling they need to sit down and write a huge handover document.
Yeah, and that kind of goes to this question as well, where they say you talk about having to communicate a lot between you and sending the longest messages in the world. Do you feel that, that this adds to your workload or diminishes the amount you can get done as you're repeating things to the other person a lot of the time? I guess that's your overlap day. So it's five that extra day, or maybe it's not, Jenny. Would you say that that extra day is kind of the additional communication that's required, or not?
I think part of the reason we have an overlap day was more about the fact that we wanted a day where if there were things that we both needed to be at, I mean, it's very rare we're both at something, but we wanted to have the opportunity that if there was something we both should be at, there was a day when we could say to people, we will both be in on this day. So, for example, one of the things we both go to is our team meeting. So our team meeting would always happen on a Wednesday once a month so that we can both be there. So I think it's less about handing over between us and it's more about giving people the opportunity to engage with both of us where they think we need to. I think what we haven't done, and we thought about it when we started, was sort of having a handover email that we left each other, and that would have been onerous and lots of effort. What we do, I mean, the text messages are very long, but a text message is still, you know, relatively a short message. It tends to be quick updates. I've just spoken to person X, I've told them this, and then maybe 2 hours later, a quick another text. And I just, on my working day, I save all of Alex's text and I read them at the end of the day to just go, okay, now I'm up to speed. It's not any more than 5 minutes of my time. So I think it's that short and sharp update rather than lots and lots of screeds of information, because that would be onerous and take lots of time.
And so therefore not copying each other on all of your email communications?
Definitely not. 100% we don't copy each other on emails. We would, because the emails come into the joint email, if there were things that we felt somewhat, you know, the other person should read that we've read, but it's something that's going to be useful for them to read, we put that in a separate folder. If we go, no, I've read it, I've got the information, I can provide a 30-second summary to Alex, delete the email, send him an email going, by the way, we've had an email confirming that X is in place. So yeah, definitely not, because that would be a nightmare if you copied each other in on everything. You've got to have trust that the other person is moving the job forward and that you know what you need to do to pick up where they've got things to when you get in to do it.
So you'd work on an assumption that in the days that you're working, you'll be covering that joint email address, yeah, and vice versa, and the other person will, yeah, need to bring that to that.
Yeah. No, it's entirely our responsibility, and that's why you have to have really good trust between you that the way the way the other half is dealing with things is pretty much the way you would deal with things, and they'll update you on where they've got it to, but they won't be updating you on a kind of blow-by-blow account of the progress. So, you know, I can go out of the office on Friday and drop Alex a note going, this has got to here, can you take it forward? And on a Wednesday, he'll drop me a note back going, it's now got to here, and I haven't had to be cited on all the shenanigans in the middle or all the emails or all the conversations. I just need an update on where it's got to.
I can see that's a great benefit. There's no further questions being posted at the moment. Let's give people just another minute and see if any of the discussion now has prompted further questions. Otherwise, just a reminder to everyone that we will be posting the slides and also the recording in the members area of the WISE website, so you can check things out on there later. And obviously we'll also be sharing Jenny and Chris's contact details if you want to go to them with anything specific. No, nothing, no extra questions, no additional questions. Okay, well, I think then we can probably give everybody 15 minutes back, unless it's lunchtime. I'm sure everyone will appreciate that. So thanks for listening today. As I say, keep an eye on the members area of the website if you want to look at the content. We'll send an email from the webinar tool anyway, which will remind you of what those links are, and also to the events and to the focus sessions that I mentioned at the beginning. If you are our main contact or one of our main contacts within your organisation, and you can spare us an hour next week on the 10th of May to give us some feedback on your membership, that would be extremely valuable to us and we'd really appreciate it. And we'll send you a link to that. Oh, no question, just a thank you. So thanks, Jenny, and thanks, Chris, and Thanks everybody for coming along. I hope you found it very useful. I certainly have. Thank you. Bye-bye.